What's up, everyone? I'm Ethan, and I'm here with my boy Garrett.
What's up? What's up?
And welcome to HIVE Sports, where we talk all things NFL and college football. Today, we're going to be giving you our top 30 fantasy wide receivers for redraft going into the 2025 season. Our list is going to be focusing on half PPR, but as many of you know, there are probably some slight differences in this list were it be a full PPR list. Right, Garrett?
Yeah, and I think obviously full PPR, half PPR, that's pretty much the only formats that people play these days. There's a few dinosaurs here and there that play in standard leagues, no offense to anyone out there, but yeah, half PPR, it's going to be slightly different. I think touchdowns are going to be a bit more important in half PPR than full PPR. And then obviously big play guys, right? So your Jamison Williams of the world are going to be a little bit more valuable in half PPR formats. And then guys who rack up a ton of receptions without maybe a ton of yardage or touchdowns are going to be more valuable in full PPR. So that did change, things maybe a little bit within tiers. Probably not going to be a ton of differences, across the tiers. Yeah. But just to touch on tiers, I think that they're a lot more helpful than just straight up rankings for drafting, right? Because you can kind of see, okay, these are where the tier breaks are. I want to plan and strategize, accordingly and make sure I get those guys before the tier drops happen. So that's kind of a little bit of rationale from our end.
Totally. And I think the fact that they're on the same tier allows you to understand, okay, maybe there's another position I want to reach after, our B tier players are gone. Maybe I'll wait to draft a C tier guy, if I have an opportunity to draft a tight end or a running back that I'm higher on, right?
Yep. All right, let's get into it, E.
Let's do it. All right, going into our A tier, starting at the top, we're going to go with Jamar Chase. Second, we're going to go Justin Jefferson. Third, we're going to be going CD Lamb. And to round it off, we're going to be going Malik Neighbors to round off the A tier. I think it's pretty consensus that those top three are, unanimously kind of the top three wide receivers. Right. I think Jamar Chase with his season last season and his connection with Joe Burrow makes him, for us, the top wide receiver. But if you're talking about just talent alone, I'm not going to disagree with somebody who has Justin Jefferson as their wide receiver one as well.
Yep. And then, CD Lamb just a couple years removed from being the overall wide receiver one. So I think he definitely belongs in this tier as well. And it's really hard to speak badly about any of these four dudes. And I think they all have a ton of upside to elevate your fantasy team to the playoffs this next season.
Totally. Now, is it your Giants bias that's showing a little bit with Malik rounding off for A tier?
I think that might be like the one non-consensus thing we have in that first tier, right? Because yep. I think Neighbors is maybe a second tier guy for most others out there in the industry. But for me, I think with the quarterback upgrade in New York, you have Brian Dable scheming Malik Neighbors open. The fact that he was able to put up the kind of stats that he did as a rookie with just, absolute
quarterback. Just abysmal quarterback play.
Right. It's so impressive. And I think it's 100% going to improve next year with Jackson Dart eventually taking over, Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston providing upgrades in the short term. So I'm excited to see what he does. I think he really does take that leap into the elite tier of fantasy production as a second-year player.
Well, and you hit it on the nail earlier too. I know we're talking about half PPR, but I think Neighbors is a huge threat in both half and full PPR because, his target share was he had 170 targets last season with, whoever was the quarterback at the time, Yeah. Whereas, the only other wide receiver and kind of on this list that had more targets is Jamar Chase, right? Who had 1,700 yards receiving, 17 touchdowns and things like that. So,
yeah, and he had Joe Burrow throwing him the ball, right?
Exactly. So. And Malik Neighbors was still wide receiver 7 last season, right? So we're only talking 3 spots below. I think bringing in Russ, Jameis, Jackson Dart, really anybody besides the Giants quarterbacks last season gives them a 3-spot boost with that high number of targets he was getting last season.
Oh, 100%. And just to touch on a little bit, CD Lamb, I don't know if anyone has any kind of concerns about George Pickens coming to town, but I think if anything, it should be a positive for CD because he's going to have a little bit less attention on him. They're not going to be able to throw as many double and triple teams at him. So I think that's a positive. I don't think anyone should knock CD for Pickens coming to town. and he's firmly in that tier for us.
Yeah, and I think, you have some concerns with Justin Jefferson as well, right? Really, Jamar Chase is the only one that is kind of solidified with the quarterback situation. We know what the team is going to be like. With Justin Jefferson, J.J. McCarthy's coming in his first season as the starter. We don't know what that's going to entail, but Justin Jefferson's just so talented that no matter who's throwing in the ball, you could put those Giants quarterbacks from last season, throw Daniel Jones out there,
Oh yeah,
and Justin Jefferson would still be a top 3 wide receiver. I mean, he's just so talented. So I'm not
But,
too worried.
yeah, man. And there was the same question marks last year, right, with Sam Darnold.
Totally,
So I mean, he's addressed those concerns before, and I think he does it again this year with JJ.
100%. All right, well, let's go into our B tier. We'll kick it off with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, and rounding it off with Drake London. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is pretty. There's some consensus with him being, in that top 5 to 7 wide receivers. Seen a lot of rankings with Puka, maybe being that 4th or 5th wide receiver, but I just love what they do in Detroit with Amon St. Brown. He is the focal point of that offense. I know there's some talks with Ben Johnson leaving, right? How that'll affect him, but you're talking about a team that is just improving and improving offensively, and a team that should be in contentions for top 3 teams in the league, right? I think you have to lead with him at that B tier spot.
Yeah, you do. That's a pretty easy one for me. He's just so consistent year in, year out. I think he gets maybe a slight bump in full PPR formats, but it's definitely not enough to knock him down in half PPR. And I mean, I like including Brian Thomas Jr. as a second guy in that tier. What are your thoughts on Travis Hunter coming to town, Ethan?
I mean, I think we've talked about Travis Hunter in the past. Obviously, as a Jags fan, I'm looking at a lot of the things going on there, but you're bringing in Liam Cohen, who is known for his high-powered offense, throwing the ball. I'm still high on Trevor Lawrence. Like, he's a generational talent. I know he hasn't produced yet, but he's had 3-4 coaches since he's entered the league. You have a guy in Liam Cohen that is coming in to put a lot of talent around Trevor Lawrence. And the fact that there's another high-level wide receiver next to Brian Thomas Jr., to me, is a win-win situation. I think it's like a Mike Evans and Chris Godwin situation. Both of them can eat, and both of them can easily be top 10 wide receivers. Not to say Travis Hunter is going to be a top 10 wide receiver, but in a couple years, if both of them are top 10 wide receivers, I think people wouldn't bat an eye at that, right? I also like Brian Thomas Jr. here, which I know is a little bit higher than some people, but when you're looking at his strength of schedule, I'm looking at some of the rankings. For a wide receiver, he's ranked 3rd on the strength of schedule, meaning the defenses he's playing this next season. He was wide receiver 4 last season, right?
Yep, wide receiver 4 already as a rookie, which is insane.
And you're talking about having a pretty manageable schedule as a wide receiver 1 on a team that should be getting better and is going to have this identity of throwing the ball with this Liam Cohen offense. He's a guy that also is just a freak talent and can make a lot of explosive plays. And in half PPR, those big explosive plays are important. I just think he's a guy that even as a top, 5, 6, 7 wide receiver this next season is going to be underrated.
Okay, so you did a good job, I think, of addressing the Travis Hunter concerns, but I'm going to throw a couple other concerns at you that I've heard from people. And the first one is that Brian Thomas Jr. only mainly produced with Mac Jones last year, not Trevor Lawrence. And the second point that I've heard brought up is the fact that the seas kind of parted last season for him to have that insane season because Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram both got injured, and they were just kind of funneling targets to Brian Thomas Jr. So how would you address those concerns that people have?
I mean, I think that's a lot of the seas have to part for a lot of guys to be fantasy relevant. Yeah. I mean, I think of Puka when he's came into league and really started to shine when Cooper Kupp went down, and they kind of had to rely on him, right? And now he's still this kind of perennial fantasy player. I'm not too worried about it. I think if you're an offense and you're a team like the Jaguars and Liam Cohen coming in, he sees what the team did with Brian Thomas Jr. and the fact that it was Mac Jones doing that with Brian Thomas Jr. The fact that now we have Trevor Lawrence who can do that, and we have a little bit more of a true alpha wide receiver 1. Last season when he was drafted, people thought he was a reach, right? When he was drafted in the first round, and so there was a little bit of uncertainty as to what the identity of him as a wide receiver was. you signed Christian Kirk to a lot of money. You brought in Gabe Davis. You had these other guys that you weren't sure, who was going to be the real wide receiver one.
Yeah.
And I know it was towards the end of the season after Trevor Lawrence got knocked out, but I mean, I think it's not rare, it's not unheard of to see rookie wide receivers progress throughout the season. And again, I'm taking Trevor Lawrence as that guy with him versus Mac Jones any day. So I think it's just going to be exponentially better.
Yeah, I love how you address those concerns. I think that it's definitely overblown. I mean, if anything, it's a
Totally.
positive, right, that he's going from Mac to T-Law, and then Liam Cohen's already been very, very vocal about how he sees Brian Thomas Jr. as the focal point of that passing offense, and how he was so excited to be able to work with Brian Thomas
Yeah.
Jr. I think that was maybe even a big reason why he chose the Jaguars because he had a lot of suitors after him as a head coach. So I like that a lot. Love Brian Thomas Jr. And another guy who may be a little more controversial that we had in this tier is Drake London, right?
Yeah, what's crazy is, looking at some of these rankings going into this, obviously, you see Drake London, falling typically, in that early C tier, but I mean, he was a wide receiver 5 last season for fantasy half PPR. He's a guy that really was performing well with Michael Penix. You have a more of a gunslinger at quarterback with Michael Penix kind of going into this year too. I think there's just a lot of excitement in Atlanta right now with that offense too, and Michael Penix. And I think there's just Drake London's kind of that dude. He's been slept on. Even when he was drafted, right? Nobody thought he was gonna be the first wide receiver taken. He's performed very well, and I think last season really showed that he can perform at a high level with Michael Penix, and give a full offseason with them being the tandem. I think is going to be exciting.
Yeah, he's definitely a guy who's trending up. Fully broke out last year after people were getting a little impatient with him after his first couple seasons, but over 1,200 yards, I believe, last year. He's a big red zone threat. He's 6'4", big guy, physical dude. He's going to catch touchdowns. He's going to be a PPR magnet. Michael Penix showed his propensity to rely on him as a safety blanket. So Drake London's a guy I think I'm a little bit higher in the consensus, and I think he firmly belongs in this tier with Nico, Puka, BT Jr., and Amon Ra.
100%. All right, well, let's get into our C tier, which I know our first guy will be talking about. Some people have in their B tier, and I think it's a little bit controversial. This is our first, maybe drop down a little bit than others, but we'll start off with AJ Brown, then we'll go up to Terry McLaurin, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then wrapping it up with Lad McConkey. Garrett, talk to us about AJ Brown. I know you were a little bit lower on him than maybe consensus is due to the situation in Philadelphia.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like you said, probably have AJ Brown in that second tier, right? And for us, he's in the third, but it's not indicative of his talent. It's not indicative of
Yeah.
how consistent he's been as a producer. It's solely just to do with the offensive environment, the climate. It's trending towards a very run-heavy offense. They brought back the tush push. So Jalen Hurts is in for another 10-plus rushing touchdowns. Saquon Barkley is being utilized as the focal point of that offense. So there's only so much to go around, and you add in the fact that they have another very talented wide receiver in Devontae Smith. I just don't know if he has that top 10 upside, but I'm very confident that he's going to be a solid producer next year.
Yeah, and I think it's tough. Last season he missed 4 games, so he's still in the regular season performed pretty well with over 1,000 yards receiving, averaging 16 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns. So he's a guy that is just like you hit it on the nail, right? He's just Mr. Consistent, Mr. Reliable. I'm happy with him on my team because I know what I'm going to get out of him. But there is that concern, right? The identity of the Eagles is that run first offense, which, when you have Saquon, then you can rely on that. And so in the past, before Saquon, when, the offense seemed to run around AJ Brown, that identity shift does make it a little bit more concerning in these half PPR leagues. But I think he's a guy that just is so consistent, so talented that when you're talking about talent alone, definitely deserves to be in that B tier. And if it wasn't for kind of the situation in Philadelphia, he would be clearly up there with the other guys we were talking about earlier.
Oh yeah, I completely agree on that. And I think we have Terry McLaurin a little bit higher than some others, right? Right behind AJ Brown in that third tier. So do you want to talk about Terry a little bit? I know he's your boy, so.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just forget. I mean, he's had 5 straight seasons of over 1,000 yards receiving. Last season, I know he had 13 touchdowns, so there was a little bit of that kind of touchdown reliance for him to be wide receiver 6. But I mean, talk about a huge upgrade at quarterback for him in his whole career. I mean, Jaden Daniels as a rookie came in as just a true star, especially a fantasy football star. And you're giving him another year, another offseason with Terry McLaurin. They've tried to upgrade their offense with bringing in Debo. They made some upgrades elsewhere, and I just don't see why Terry McLaurin couldn't jump even higher than he was last year at wide receiver 6, right? And so, we have him at, what is this, wide receiver 10, 11 at this point? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, wide receiver 11, right? And you're telling me that as a wide receiver 6 last season that he couldn't still sit within that, top 10 wide receiver. I think it's nonsense. I think the Commanders are going to be pushing for division. They're going to push the Eagles to win the division, and I think they're a team that can really make a splash this next season.
Yeah, we have him at wide receiver 11. He was wide receiver 6 last year, like you said. So even if we factor in Debo coming in to Washington, I think that's easily, still very, very foreseeable, him being a top 12 guy. So I like the pick. I like bumping him up into that third tier. A lot of others maybe don't have him quite that high. But he's a guy I was rooting for to have a quarterback forever, man. Like, it's forever, and he finally has one. So we gotta get some shares while we can.
I mean, and he's been he's 4 straight seasons of playing 17 games, which the fact that he's dependable and available is important. And people just seem to forget, like, they didn't upgrade the running back situation, so it's like this is what they have. Like, Terry McLaurin's the guy. They brought in Debo to be the wide receiver 2 there. And to be that second weapon. They have Zach Ertz as their tight end. Like, the offense is going to revolve around Terry McLaurin. If they're going to take that next step, like a lot of people think they're going to, I mean, Terry McLaurin, to me, it wouldn't be shocking if he's a top 5 wide receiver.
Yeah, it could even help him having Debo there, and
totally.
Defenses may not be able to put as much attention on him. So I like that. Garrett Wilson is kind of a guy who is in a similar trajectory as Terry McLaurin, I think. And just looking at Terry McLaurin's career, right, we always knew he had that elite upside. He had that upper echelon talent, but he was always held back by his quarterback play. And Garrett Wilson was a guy we thought, Aaron Rodgers is coming to town. That trend is going to be, bucked, and he's finally going to have that top 5 season that we've been hoping for, and never really manifested. And I think people kind of punished him for that and pushed him down the rankings, perhaps a little more than they should have.
I mean, wide receiver 11 last season. Devontae was wide receiver 14, so Aaron Rodgers fed 2 top 15 wide receivers last season. Devontae's now gone. They're bringing Justin Fields, who obviously isn't Aaron Rodgers, but it's not like Aaron Rodgers was, he was a shell of himself when he was in his prime. But it's not like Justin Fields hasn't fed wide receivers in the past, right? I mean, look at him with DJ Moore, a few seasons ago. I mean, 1,300 yards. He relies on kind of one playmaker, and Garrett Wilson's, when it comes to talent, is as good as they come, right?
Oh, he loves funneling, I think, to his main number one target. I think we've seen that from Justin Fields throughout his career, just with DJ Moore having that 1,300 plus yard season. I believe he was definitely a top 10 guy that year. So it just shows that Justin Fields can support an elite wide receiver 1 in fantasy, and I think Garrett Wilson does have that upside. Obviously, it's not a sure thing because we got to see how that offense looks. Maybe a little bit more run heavy with Justin Fields there, but I don't know, man. I just don't think you can. I don't think you can push Garrett Wilson past the third tier just because of his talent and the fact that Fields is probably going to lock onto him.
No, and some people have him, in their 4th tier, and I think it's just crazy. I mean, who else are they throwing the ball to?
Yeah,
they drafted Mason Taylor, Alan Lazard. Like, who are they throwing the ball to? I mean, they have Breece Hall, and they have this weird situation at running back where they're trying to use 3 guys or something. But like, Garrett Wilson's the dude. He's the dude on the team, and if they're gonna win even a handful of games next season, he's going to have to eat for them all season long. And like you were saying, Justin Fields is a guy that just pinpoints on one person and just says, hey, I trust that Garrett Wilson's going to be open, or at least can make this contested catch. And he's just going to chuck it up there, and that's what's going to happen. And I truly think that Garrett Wilson's going to be a top 10 wide receiver this next season for fantasy. And the fact that he's slipping to like wide receiver 15, 16, close to 20 is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, and I think we even thought about kind of ending the tier here after Garrett Wilson and including JSN and McConkey in the next tier. But just because of how much those two showed they can command targets last year, I think JSN and McConkey, they both had a 24% target share last year on their teams, respectively. They're both young guys. They're both dudes who are going to be the number one target on their team. So we thought that it was appropriate to include them in this third tier.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're a little bit lower on Lad than others, and I say that. I mean, I think we drafted him in multiple leagues last season, and he,
Oh yeah,
was wide receiver 12 last season as a rookie, a guy that a lot of people didn't expect him to be kind of this elite fantasy player. But I'm just worried about, they upgraded their running attack significantly in Los Angeles.
oh yeah.
Jim Harbaugh has that kind of run first mentality. They brought in Trey Harris, who's going to definitely take some target shares away from Ladd. So I think he's very talented, and I think at the 14 spot he's a steal at this point because he is their wide receiver one. But I would prefer AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Scary Terry, and Jason in front of him, and that's saying to a guy that drafted him, multiple leagues last season, right?
Yeah, he's a super talented dude, but I mean, even just looking at his picture right here, man, like he looks like a little kid, like a little boy almost, you know. And I just they fed him so much down the stretch, and you could see him getting banged up a little bit, right? So I think that they're gonna take that into consideration. They're gonna try to use Trey Harris. They're gonna see
Yeah.
who else steps up. Maybe one of the tight ends steps up. Oronde Gadsden is a little sneaky. They have a few other guys. Quentin Johnston can't really catch the ball very well at times, but he'll probably get some targets himself. So I don't know. I do love McConkey, but I would say probably a little bit higher on him in full PPR formats and half
Yeah.
PPR because I just don't really see him as a guy who's going to score a ton of touchdowns. I don't see him as a guy who's uh, he's not going to be averaging 17 yards per catch like Jamison Williams. He's more of a volume guy. He needs to command targets. He needs to rack up a lot of receptions, righty?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he averaged 14 yards per reception, which is pretty good, compared
Yeah,
to his peers. But yeah, I agree. I just think there's a world where he kind of stays the same where he's at, right? Which is the
yeah,
wide receiver 12 to 15. But I don't see a world where he maybe cracks into that top 10, especially because they upgraded a lot of pieces in that offense this next season. I think too, just kind of wrapping up this tier, JSN, I feel like fits well at the end of this tier too because he's the dude now. Even last season, throughout the season he kind of became the wide receiver one in Seattle, and the fact that DK is gone now, he's the guy. And I know they brought in Cooper Cup, who I am still a fan of, and I think he still has some to give, but. I think there's a little bit of worry with the quarterback situation. They gave Sam Darnold a lot of money for one season with Justin Jefferson, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
that's got to be a little scary there, and not exactly sure what they're going to be doing. What their kind of identity is going to be like in Seattle.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of risk just at the team level with, the uncertainty. How's the new offense going to look? I think they have some new coaching staff coming in there. So there's a little bit of uncertainty, but to me, it's obvious he's a top target on the team. Like you said, even being higher in Cup than consensus, I think we can all recognize that he probably has less target competition than last year with the departures that happened. So I think he's going to command a ton of targets, and I think he does belong in this tier. But moving on to the next tier, I think we can talk a little bit about Devonte Adams going to Los Angeles.
Yeah, and so going into our D tier, we have Devonte Adams starting us off. Then we have T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans, and Cortland Sutton. So we're fans of Devonte Adams for sure. I mean, wide receiver 14 last season with that atrocious Jets team. He's just a guy that, as he gets older, he still just is a dude. He's still the guy that quarterbacks like to focus on when he's out there. He's a guy that kind of demands targets, and I think he's going to a team where you have a Sean McVay offense, you have Matt Stafford, who has for several years really been able to feed multiple wide receivers of being very fantasy relevant wide receivers. And I think getting him at the fourth tier, even our list, it just seems like it's still just a cheap value for him, right, in this fourth tier.
Yeah, we debated including him in that third tier, so it was definitely kind of bit on the fringe. But just with the age, he's getting up there a little bit. He is probably the second target, behind Puka in Los Angeles, but he still has a ton to give, and I think that You're someone who's been a supporter of him since day one, and I think you can speak to his upside in Los Angeles pretty well, which you already did. But what do you think his like upside is? Like, what would you say this is the highest I could possibly see him finishing next year?
Oh man, I mean, listen, I think with a better Rams team and hopefully he's healthy. He missed a few games last season even. Like I would not be surprised to see him, over 1,200 yards, close to 10 touchdowns. I mean, that would fit him in what wide receiver 6, 5 to 7, 8. Like I think there's
Yeah.
there's there's upside for him to get into the single digits for sure. Do I think he's going to be a top 3, top 4 fantasy wide receiver? Probably not. But would I be surprised if he was wide receiver 8, even with Puka? No. I mean, he's a red zone threat for sure for on this team that is trying to kind of keep that Super Bowl hope alive, right? So he's brought in to be that dude next to Puka, and I think this is there's only a couple more seasons they have with Matt Stafford and the rest of this kind of team to really push for the playoffs.
Yeah, and Adams, he kind of reminds me of someone in a different sport a little bit, Kobe Bryant, and I think he's just the kind of talent who he's not gonna play if he doesn't think that he can perform at the highest level. And that may be just like mainly because of his ego. You know what I mean? He has quite a big ego. He backs it up on the field, but he knows how good he is, and I don't think that he's the kind of guy who would continue to play if he doesn't think he can go out there and be an elite wide receiver. So that's
Totally.
another thing to factor in. But I mean,
Let's
T Higgins, or go ahead.
I was gonna, I think T Higgins fits pretty well there, but I think we should move to DK Metcalf because I know
Okay.
that's a bit of a reach there for some of the other rankings we've seen. Which, let's caveat, Aaron Rodgers just signed with the Steelers now, so I
Yeah.
think you have to move DK up there, up the list quite a bit. Now that Aaron Rodgers is coming in, especially knowing last season that Aaron Rodgers was able to feed Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams to two top 15 wide receivers in fantasy, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, DK. I think the only thing that was preventing me from being full fledged on board on the hype train was the quarterback situation. As Mason Rudolph and Will Howard are going to be throwing him balls, and now we don't have to worry about that. So that's just a huge boost to his stock. And I mean, they paid him so much money in that trade, man. They're paying him like he's like a top 10 wide receiver in the league, and I would be shocked if they didn't utilize him as much as possible after giving him that kind of
100%.
contract. So I think he's in for a big year in Pittsburgh.
I mean, he's also just going to a team that's going to be above 500, right? Like now, like with Aaron Rodgers and with an improvement in the running game, Mike Tomlin just knows how to win games, and I think DK Metcalf is going to have to perform for them to be, greater than 500. And I just don't see a world where, he doesn't crack that top 20 fantasy wide receivers with the situation Aaron Rodgers and bringing in, Caleb Johnson and some other offseason pieces. I think he fits very comfortably in this D tier list now that they've signed Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have a lot behind him either, do they? I mean, they have Pat Freiermuth, they traded George Pickens, so at wide receiver at least behind DK, there's not a ton. And even if they're more run heavy of an offense, which they probably will be, I could still see DK eating this year in Pittsburgh,
100%.
man. I mean, I really could. So,
Yeah, agreed.
but moving on to Mike Evans, I think he was the next guy that was a little bit like we maybe didn't see completely eye to eye on Mike and how to view him going into next year. He's a tricky one.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious because I know I know I'm a bit higher on Mike Evans than you are. So curious your thoughts. Why you feel like he doesn't deserve to kind of be in that C tier with the other guys that we talked about previously.
Yeah, you're gonna make me sound like a jerk now, man. The guy who's coming off
Putting you on the
12
spot.
consecutive or whatever it is, however many
1,000 yard
consecutive
season.
1,000-yard seasons, breaking the record. I mean, just an absolute Hall of Fame talent. It's not that he doesn't deserve to be here. He definitely does, based on the past. I think my concern is just is that going to be indicative of the future, right? Because he is 32 years old. He's going to be going to his age 32 season next year. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers brought in Emeka Egbuka on top of Chris Godwin returning, and they did just extend Chris Godwin to a 3-year, $66 million contract.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of speaks to the fact that they believe he's going to be healthy next year, or I don't really see them giving him that contract. So he's another guy Jalen McMillan is a dude who flashed quite a bit as a rookie. So there's a little bit of uncertainty. Liam Cohen's leaving, so it's just enough for me to kind of have a little bit of pause. But if he stays healthy, it's really hard to see him not returning value on this ADP, right?
Yeah, I mean, at kind of the fourth tier, 100%. I think there's so much value, and I would have put him, maybe tail end of that C tier, maybe higher up on the D tier than right here. But he's a guy that, just like you're saying, I mean, he 10 straight 1,000 yard seasons. I mean, that's ridiculous. This past season he was a little bit more reliant on the touchdowns to get him to that wide receiver 9 than I think we would hope, especially with only just 1,000 yards receiving. But I mean, if the Bucks are going to do well, like I think Mike Evans still has to be that red zone threat. I think he's a guy that there's no world in my mind unless he gets injured, but there's no world in my mind where they won't try to push him for that 11th 1,000
Yeah,
yard season, right?
that's a
So you
good
have
point. Yeah.
the fact that he's going to try and get that 1,000 yards, and the fact that he is still an elite red zone threat. I don't see why he couldn't easily be a top 15 wide receiver next season, even with Emeka Ibuka and Chris Godwin and Jalen McMillan, because I think their wide receiver core is super talented, but
Yeah.
somebody's gonna get injured. Chris Godwin hasn't been healthy in a while. You just never know with injuries, and the fact that there's four pretty talented wide receivers in that room, I think just allows Baker Mayfield some freedom to kind of just chuck the ball around the field, and like he's been doing this past couple seasons. So I'm not
Yeah.
too worried about Emeka Ibuka. I think that kind of looks a couple years down the road for him to really take over for Mike Evans. But I think just Mike Evans, his kind of style of play is just different than Emeka Ibuka too. So
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
too worried about that.
Okay, well, let's see what you have to say about this next pushback. So, I'd love to hear your honest thoughts though, like just as a bull case for him, because I'm a little more bearish, and I mean, I'll point to the fact that he barely crossed that 1,000 yard threshold last year. He had some injury problems, right? And
Yep.
he's a guy who had previously been extremely durable. He's a humongous human being, right? So he's a little more durable than some of those other wide receivers. But just last year, the age is concerning. The injury issues are a little bit concerning to me. And I mean, if he stays healthy, it's hard to push back. But that's just kind of my main concerns. But I'm curious your thoughts.
I mean, he played 14 games last season. Like I know that's obviously he missed a few games, but it's not like he missed half the season, right? So
Right.
I agree. I mean, obviously, with age comes that risk of injury, and there's always going to be that risk when you're talking about a guy, who's 33. But I just think he's like you're saying, he's been a reliable and a guy that's just kind of been durable. And so if I get bit in the butt because this is the season that his body starts kind of giving in a little bit, then okay. But if he's a guy that's able to play 14 games in a season still, and he's able to get over 1,000 yards and eight
Yeah.
plus touchdowns,
Yeah.
like I'm happy with him at the 18 spot, right?
All right, I think you convinced me a little bit. I might be a little bit more in than I was previously, but we also have another guy in this tier, right? He's maybe a little bit higher than others have him, and that's Cortland Sutton. But he's kind of your guy, right? So I'd love to hear your bull case for him.
Yeah, I mean he's a guy that he's the wide receiver 1 in Denver. You're talking about Bo Nix going into year 2. You've tried to upgrade that running back situation, signing Evan Ingram, who's going to be playing that kind of joker role in that Sean Payton offense. I just I just see a world where Cortland Sutton has a similar season to last season. I mean, I see if he can play all 17 games, even 15 to 17 games, I easily see him being an over 1,000 yard receiving threat, close to double digits in touchdowns. I mean, he was wide receiver 13 last season, and we're talking about him at the 19 spot, and that
Yeah.
the Broncos team is just getting better, right? Like that's my thing. When you're a wide receiver 1 on a team that is just getting better and better, and this offseason, the Broncos just were bringing in talent after talent on defense, signing Evan Ingram, drafting RJ Harvey. I mean, I just see a world where Cortland Sutton's just going to have a better season than last season, especially with Bo Nix really elevating his play towards the end of the season. And I mean, like I was saying, I mean, at the 19 spot, I
That's
think
good
he's easily
value.
a top 20 wide receiver.
Yeah, that's good value, man. And I kind of see him similarly in like a Marcus Colston vein, where I think that it's Sean Payton offense. I think he's playing a similar role as a clear number one wide receiver. And I mean, he still has, I think he still has a good amount left in the tank. I mean, he's not over 30 years old. He has had some injury issues throughout his career, but he's finally healthy. And he was a model of consistency. And that's something else that I look for in these wide receivers, especially, is how high is their floor? Are they going to give me consistency week in, week out? Or are they going to be
Totally.
these kind of wide receivers who are up and down? 2 points, then 30 points, then 5 points, then 20, So if you have a guy who's steady like Cortland Sutton, I think that even adds more value than just looking at his point total in a vacuum. I think you got to factor that in.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy that has always kind of throughout his career has been pretty slept on. And I mean, he's a 6'4", super long wide receiver who can be in my opinion, can be a star of a wide receiver one on this team that's just getting significantly better this past couple seasons. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see him. I would kind of put the flag down, say that he could fall within that top 10 wide receivers this next season. But we'll have to see.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. All
All
right.
right.
So,
Yep. Going into our
you
E tier, we're going to start us off with Tyreek Hill, then DJ Moore, Rasheed Rice, Zay Flowers, Chris Godwin, and then wrapping it up with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, this
Ty-
is a little bit of a bigger tier, isn't it? There's a lot of guys in here, and I think that a lot of people might be kind of surprised by Cortland Sutton being ahead of Tyreek Hill, right?
yeah, I mean, when you're talking about talent, I mean, Tyreek is a freak, right? He's, chiseled, running a 4.3, 4.2 40, and just he's, quick as can be. But just the offseason stuff, man. When you're talking about fantasy, like as much as talent is super important on a team, but like just being available and being reliable is super important. If he gets traded or whatever happens in the offseason and he's on a different team, starting week one, I think he can easily be one, if not two tiers higher, maybe even more, honestly. But as of right now, like we don't even know if he's gonna be playing this offseason. And at this point, we're gonna have to just rely on the fact that he plays football. Like, I don't know, like there's a lot of question marks. And even in Miami in general, there's question marks with Tua's health and what's gonna happen if, he gets banged up. And, you know, I just I think he's a guy that has all the talent, and if he finds a team that he's more confident playing on and more comfortable with, but at this point, I'm not touching them.
It feels so weird, like just saying Tyreek Hill is a stay away from me, guys. Like I know he's only 2 years away from almost hitting 2,000 receiving yards, but I completely agree. I'm scared to take him right now when I'm doing these preseason underdog best ball drafts when I'm drafting for fun. I hover over Tyreek's name even when it's a good value, and it takes a little bit to click it because it's scary, man. I mean, he's trying to force his way out of Miami. He looked like a completely different player last year. I know he was managing some injuries. I think he had a wrist injury and maybe a shoulder, but he was managing some injuries last year. But man, I can't help but think like this is like the Antonio Brown career arc where he's just like going off the deep end. He has all these legal issues that he's dealing with in the off season. Seems like his head is just not focused on football, which is always a concern.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on the nail, right? So like he played all 17 games last season. I know he was banged up at times, but he
Yeah.
lined up first snap in all 17 games last season, and he only had 81 receptions for a guy that has been just a target workhorse his whole career. I mean, he only had 6 touchdowns, right? In the past, 13 touchdowns, 15 touchdowns, 12 touchdowns. I mean, he's a guy that has had over 170, targets twice in his career, and then last season has 120, right? Like I know the
Yeah.
quarterback situation was weird in Miami, but like the fact that he's coming off this type of season, there's still a lack of clarity with the quarterback situation in Miami. And then there's this weird off-season energy with Tyreek and McDaniel and what's going to happen over there. And it's just hard. When I'd rather take any of these guys in the past four tiers that we've talked about over him at this point. But again, if you can get him with good value, he is so talented that when he is out there, he can really make an impact. So you never know what's going to happen, and he could be a guy that just like randomly gets cut and then signed by some team, and then he's a star again.
Yeah, and I think that Tyreek, he may have the largest or the widest range of outcomes just when looking at these guys, especially within this tier. I think there's a chance that maybe not in Miami because it's a weird vibe right now, but I think there still is a chance that Tyreek, he's healthy. Maybe he was just banged up last year. He gets his head right, and he's a top 5 wide receiver again. I think that is within the range of outcomes. It would surprise me a little bit, obviously, but I
Yeah.
think it's possible. And it's also possible that he just kind of like barely plays, or he's like on that Antonio Brown arc where he maybe he's not even playing football next year. Like I could see that too. So it's pretty crazy with how far he's fallen because I think heading into last year he was a clear tier 1 guy coming off
100%.
the kind of seasons that he'd been putting up, but he's had quite the fall from grace.
Yep. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll have to update this list as we get closer to the season for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, Garrett. Let's talk about these next four guys, maybe in kind of one group with DJ
Yeah.
Moore, Rasheed Rice, Zay Flowers, and Chris Godwin. I know they're a little bit different. Let's talk about Rasheed Rice and Chris Godwin first because both guys are coming off of these pretty big, excruciating injuries. Like what can we foresee with Rasheed Rice and Chris Godwin?
No, I think that's a perfect way to kind of to group them, because they're both coming off the serious injuries. Chris Godwin, I think, I mean, a little more confidence in Chris Godwin just because of that contract extension. That shows me that the team has faith in him and his recovery. I'm not going to say that I'm worried about Rasheed Rice. I think there's just maybe a little bit more uncertainty, right? Because I mean, Rasheed Rice, that was a pretty serious injury if I remember correctly when Mahomes blew out his knee and stuff. So I think it might have been multiple tendons, but you can fact check me on that. But I think the main concern is health with both these guys. If they're on the field, I think you could easily make an argument. These guys are 100% healthy. They belong in the C or D tier as opposed to the E tier. But health is the
Yeah,
main concern.
yeah, and I'm with you on that. And I think the reason that I personally, and I think I pushed for Rasheed Rice a little bit higher than Chris Godwin, is just because I mean Rasheed Rice is 25, so he's still young, and Chris Godwin, like this isn't his first rodeo with injuries, right? And so I think there's a lot of talks right now that Rasheed Rice should be able to kind of suit up week one. He got injured week four last season, so basically had a full season last season to try to get healthy for this upcoming season. Definitely some question marks with Xavier Worthy and how the Chiefs will utilize him. But one thing I know is that Rasheed Rice, when he was on the field, is very talented, and he is the guy that this offense is going to run through. And the fact that Travis Kelce is kind of dropping down a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised if the offense was running through both Rasheed Rice and Xavier Worthy, by the middle of this next season. So I think
Yeah.
getting him outside the top 20 wide receivers is still pretty good value because the upside I think is there if he's healthy and he's back to 100%. But I do think there is a risk, right? He did have a pretty significant injury, and sometimes you just never come back from this type of injuries.
Yeah, but that's a good point on like he has had a ton of time to recover, being injured week 4 as opposed to Chris Godwin being injured week 10. A little bit different injuries, dislocated ankle versus a knee injury, but I mean I think you hit it on the head with that analysis. And they have Rasheed Rice just running all the gimme routes in Kansas City when he's out there healthy. He's kind of taken over a lot of those slants, those quick in breaking routes from Travis Kelce, trying to keep a little bit of wear and tear, I think, off of Travis Kelce's
Yeah.
body for the playoffs. So if he's healthy, I would clearly have him ahead of Xavier Worthy. I think it's kind of crazy that they're as close as they are in ADP, especially if we're assuming that Rasheed Rice is healthy heading into the next year.
100%. Yeah, definitely agree with that. But let's finish off our ET here with the guy that I think was probably our biggest disagreement when it comes to their rankings here. So I was a little bit higher on Marvin Harrison Jr. than I know you were. So I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll give you the bear case against him, and it really doesn't have much to do with his talent. Like I was super high on him coming out. I mean, he's an incredibly talented prospect. No one's denying that. He has those genes. He has the size. He has the route running ability. So I'm not questioning that. I'm more questioning how the Cardinals are going to use him. I'm concerned about his usage. I'm concerned about the kind of routes that they have him running. I listen to Matt Harmon quite a bit. I think he's pretty dang good at evaluating wide receivers. He maps all their routes, and he was concerned about the fact that I mean, Marvin was doing his best work on out breaking routes, on horizontally breaking routes, and the Cardinals were having him run vertical breaking routes much, much more frequently than horizontally breaking routes. So I'm just a little bit concerned about the coaching staff actually doing the rational thing, which you would assume rational coaching, right? But it doesn't always happen like we would
Yeah.
expect in the NFL.
Well, and there's that risk too. Kyler Murray's a shorter quarterback, so those kind of over the middle throws probably he's probably not as comfortable with that, right? It's harder to kind of see pass off into line, but I completely disagree. Come on,
Let's hear the bull case. Let's hear it.
Marvin Harrison Jr. finished as a wide receiver 29 last season, right? We're talking about draft. We're talking about him right now as our wide receiver 25 spot. I mean, we're talking about 4 spots being higher than what he finished last season, and that was an underperformed season, right? Everybody was like, "Oh wow, he's that's such a down season for him." He had almost 900 yards receiving. He had 8 touchdowns. I mean, he was the leading target for the Cardinals in the red zone. And to me, there's no world where in the offseason, coaching staff's going to say, "Oh yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. Performed a lot better on horizontal running routes. So let's just keep running them vertical routes, this next season." Like there's no world.
You'd be surprised, man. You'd be surprised by some of these
You're talking about
coaching
top
staff.
5 draft capital and a guy that's like 6'3", 210,
Yeah.
who clearly, like you're talking about. I mean, when he's running these horizontal routes, like he's winning those routes at a much higher percentage than he was those vertical running routes. And I know how good Trey McBride is, and I know they like to use him on those kind of horizontal moving routes, but I don't care. You're
Yeah.
talking about a top 5 drafted wide receiver last season or last draft, and a guy that still performed pretty well. Like I don't know, like people are just like, "Oh yeah, 900 yards as a rookie, 8 touchdowns, that sucks." Like that's crazy to me. And the fact that
Yeah.
people don't think that he's not going to take another jump, which 4 spots is a tiny step for Marvin Harrison Jr. when it comes to his prospect profile and his talent that he has.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, to me, there's no world where the Cardinals want to do anything this next season and Marvin Harrison Jr. isn't a top 20 fantasy wide receiver. In fact,
Yeah.
I could easily see him being a top 15 fantasy wide receiver.
Oh,
and if not,
okay.
they need to get rid of Kyler Murray because he's the problem. Like whatever the problem is, they need to get rid of him because you don't draft a wide receiver 4th overall, a guy that truthfully has one of the best prospect profiles we've seen coming out of college, and just keep saying, "Hey, this is what you're weakest at." Just keep doing that over and over again. Like that's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, you laid it out very well, and I think you're right. I mean, you take a guy top 5, he doesn't produce exactly as you would expect as a rookie. It's hard to argue that hey, they're probably gonna take a look at hey, what do we do well, what do we not do well when utilizing him, and they're probably gonna try to make some adjustments heading into next year. I'm a little concerned about Kyler's connection with him. Like you said, his height kind of limits his ability to throw over the middle of the field. But it's gonna be an interesting one. I think that people are kind of just jumping to hey, 2nd-year breakout. This is gonna happen. He's too talented for it not to. And I could see that argument, but I could also see it taking 2 or 3 years for him to truly break out. But at this price, I can't really hate on you too much, man, because it's not a big jump from 29 to 25, and you could easily see him finishing higher than that as well. So
Yeah, I mean, let's look at this right now. Wide receiver 25 last season was Juwan Jennings. I'm taking Marvin Harrison Jr. over Juwan Jennings any day of the week. Juwan Jennings last season had 975 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns.
yeah, it's not asking for a ton.
I'm asking for, one more game where you kind of have 50 plus more yards than you did, and you keep the touchdowns that you had, right? Like to me, that jump is so small that there's no world where Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't crack that top 25. And like I said, I think he's a top 20 fantasy wide receiver, and I'll plant that flag for sure.
I like it, man. We'll see how that one plays out. We'll have to revisit it.
Let's go into our last tier here. Starting our F tier with Jamison Williams, then Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Stephon Diggs, and wrapping us up, rookie Tet McMillan.
Yes, sir.
G.
Jamison Williams.
Yep.
You know that's my boy.
That
My
is.
boy.
I know you're pretty high on him.
I'm a little biased, right? Because I had him as my wide receiver 1 in the class coming out. I had him ahead of Garrett Wilson and some other guys. Maybe that hasn't panned out exactly as I expected, just yet. But I still think he has. I think he has an untapped potential to take another step this year. Last year he broke 1,000 yards. on what was it? I think it was less than 60 receptions. He
Yep,
had 17
58
yards per catch.
receptions.
Yeah, less than 60 receptions. I mean, 17 yards per catch. The guy might be one of the fastest players in the league, regardless of position. Like I could easily see him being like a 4.2 40 guy.
Yep.
He's just so exciting. I mean, all it takes is one play, and that's 10 fantasy points right there. And we talked a little bit about half PPR. Big plays are going to be more important. Touchdowns are going to be more important. And Jameson Williams, a guy who can give you both of those in spurts.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's a guy that new offense coordinator coming in, lots of tweets going out about Jameson Williams just being that dude. I mean, he hasn't even played a full season yet in this past 3 seasons. I mean, he's had these kind of weird gambling situations, some injuries, and like you were saying, I mean, over 17 yards per reception, 1,000 yards receiving on 90 targets. Like that's absurd. And I think he's a perfect tandem with Amon St. Brown. And I think
Yeah.
if the Lions are to take that next step to really be contenders, Jameson Williams is for sure gonna have to be the guy that really takes that next step this next season.
Yeah, and like you said, the offensive coordinator has been very vocal about Jameson Williams being a breakout candidate for next year. I think they can give him more targets. I know there's a lot of target competition. You got Amon-Ra St. Brown, you got Sam Laporta, but I do think that it can even be a more consolidated target share than it was last year. Like just cut out the Tim Patrick targets, cut out these they're moving up in the draft for Isaac Tesla, which people are concerned a little bit about with Jameson Williams. But for me, that's a future move, man. I don't think
Yeah.
Isaac Tesla is a kid who's ready to step in on day one and offer any kind of starting potential. But yeah, man, I think that JMO has that upside to really break out next year, and especially in half PPR formats. I think he can give you
100%.
some huge games. The only thing that I will kind of like caveat it with is just the fact that he's a boom bust kind of guy, and those dudes are a little more frustrating at times to own. But when he does give you that week winning upside, he gives you that 40
Yeah.
point, 30 point performance. That's going to win you the week. And I think for me, I'd rather just slot that guy into my flex spot, my wide receiver 3 spot every week, and just take the bad weeks with the good ones. And then when you get the good ones, it's giving you that week winning upside. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my perspective on it.
100%. All right, let's move past Devontae Smith. I think, people are pretty aware of his talents and kind of that situation in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
But one I'm curious of your perspective is Jalen Waddle. I know he's a guy that you were really high on coming out of Alabama in the draft a few years ago, a guy that
Yeah.
also has kind of this weird situation in Miami. So curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, he made me look really, really smart, and then he got signed to a huge contract extension, and then he made me look really, really dumb last year. So it was kind of weird how that happened, but I
Yeah.
expect him to bounce back, man. I think that he's a safer bet than Tyreek Hill in some ways. Obviously, he may not have that same kind of upside as Tyreek does, just being a couple years removed from almost 2,000 yards. I don't think he's quite in that echelon. But I do think that he's a guy who he's due for a bounce back performance, and people are really punishing him, which I get because he lost people money last year. He cost people a lot of matchups. But you got to have a short memory sometimes in fantasy football because one year to the next it can be a big difference, and we don't know what exactly that Miami offense is going to do heading into next year. But assuming rational coaching, you would think that they would feed the guy who they just gave a ton of money more often than they did last year when they were giving Johnny Smith more targets than him, right?
100%. And I think people forget Jalen Waddle's first 3 seasons, he had over 1,000 yards receiving.
Yeah.
Excuse me. He's a guy that has been fairly consistent besides last season, which if you were following football and you saw what was going on in Miami, Tua was in and out of every single game, it seemed like. The
Yeah.
backup quarterback situation was atrocious. And I know he didn't perform last season, but I mean, no, not many people did perform for Miami last season. Only 2 touchdowns is crazy, right?
Yeah.
I just don't. I see a world where Jalen Waddle's floor was last season, and I don't think we're going to see that again. If you have either Tua or even Zach Wilson or Quinn Ewers, I think are upgrades to what they had last season with the backups. But his ceiling is, I think, extremely high. I mean, you mentioned we don't know what's going to happen with Tyreek. We think that situation's. I mean, he could easily be out of Miami this next season, and then
Yeah.
you have Jalen Waddle as the guy. And I think if Miami wants to be, any kind of remnant of what they've been, a few seasons ago, he's going to have to really take that next step and be what he was in year two, where he was, near 1,400 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns, and kind of really that guy in Miami.
Yeah, you laid it out really well there, and I think he's due. I think he's gonna be a lot better next year. But another guy who we included in this tier, who a lot of people are not even gonna have in their top 30, is Stephon Diggs, and I'm curious to hear what exactly you love about Stephon Diggs. 'Cause I know there's been a lot of media attention lately with the whole boat situation, and people are
Yeah.
questioning his commitment. But none of the coaching staff's doing that, right? They're all sold on Stephon Diggs.
Listen, Stephon Diggs is a veteran. He showed up to OTAs. He's a guy that's going to be out there and playing his hardest.
Yeah.
Last season, he ended, missed half the season with the ACL. I don't get why even Stephon Diggs is this low on our list. Like, truthfully, I mean, the past 6 seasons before last season, he was way over 1,000 yards every season. I mean, he was consistently a first round fantasy draft player for years because he was just Mr. Consistent and Mr. Reliable. I mean, he missed 4 games the past 5 years. If you cut out last season, I mean, he had an ACL tear, right? And that's fortunately it's a surgery that people can really bounce back from. And he's going into the situation in New England where they've changed the coaching staff. Drake May is going into year 2 as a dude. They've upgraded their offense with Travion Henderson. They drafted Kyle Williams. They're really making the effort. They signed Will Campbell or drafted Will Campbell.
Yeah.
So they're making an effort to put weapons around Drake May. Stephon Diggs is that wide receiver 1 in New England. And listen, I feel like I've made a bunch of flag plants today. I'll put this right here. This is the biggest one. Stephon Diggs, top 15 wide receiver in fantasy football this next season.
Sheesh, man.
Come on. I mean, he had 1,100 yards, almost 1,200 yards the season before, 1,400 yards, 1,200, 1,500. Like, come on. Really? We're saying one ACL tear, and now he's this like he's being drafted as wide receiver 40 now? Come on. Please. Like, I
like
know I'm going
it.
to get a
I
lot
like
of flack
it.
for this, but please. Like, he is going into a way better situation for him in New England now. He gets to kind of get that weird year in Houston out of his, memory, and he's going to a team that is developing and it is growing, and he's coming into that team to be that veteran wide receiver 1 who can show the ropes to these younger guys and be that dude for them next season. That's what they signed him for.
Yeah, and Drake May, he's a guy who I'm really high on. I know a lot of other people are really high on. He was impressive last year, especially when you consider Hunter Henry was probably his only legitimate target. I mean, he's throwing to Kayshon Boutte out there. He's throwing to who else do they have? Jalen Polk didn't do anything as a rookie. I mean, Kendrick
got
Bourne.
hurt too, but there's levels to this, and Stephon Diggs is like the best wide receiver that New England's had since Wes Walker. I don't know, like who? Gronk?
I don't know, man. It's been a minute. Yeah, so I like him. I think he's going to be a target magnet for Drake May. I think he's the obvious wide receiver 1 in New England. I think people like Kyle Williams, but that's probably going to take a little bit of time. Stephon Diggs could even be a dude who helps Kyle Williams with his development, but I really do think that he's sold in. He's bought into the program in New England, and he's showing up to OTAs. There's already positive reports about him mentoring Jalen Polk. So I think these concerns about the boat situation are vastly overblown, and we could easily see him return to top 24 status. I'm just a little bit concerned about how he's going to return from that injury at his advanced age, but the upside is definitely there.
And you know what? Last thing about the boat situation before you wrap us up. Vrabel's the perfect coach to just be like, no shit allowed. Like, he's a guy that's just going to come in there and be like, listen, cut this like distraction out of here. Stop with this nonsense and just kind of be this Hall of Fame veteran wide receiver that you are, So, anyways.
And it's May, bro. It's May. Are we talking about him being on a boat in May and trying to enjoy his Memorial Day? Like, what's going on with that? It's not like he's doing this stuff, when we're close to the season. But
100%.
They got to cut him. They got to cut my boy a little bit of slack. But Yeah, so just to round out the last tier, we have a rookie, right? E?
Ted McMillan, yeah, I know he's a guy that you're pretty high on in a situation in Carolina, getting top 10 draft stock there. So, what are your thoughts on Ted McMillan here? I know a lot of people, one, they don't like seeing rookies and some of these rankings like this, as we know from our other videos. But also, even considering rookies, I mean, 30 for Ted McMillan is pretty high compared to some other rankings we've seen, right?
Yeah, and I mean, times are changing, man. We used to be in a fantasy landscape where rookies would hardly ever be top five, top 10 guys in redraft. But last year alone, we saw Malik Neighbors up there. We saw Brian Thomas Jr. up there. We saw Ladd McConkey up there. There was a lot of dudes who produce like elite redraft wide receivers and just as rookies. And I don't think that this class is on that level. That's why we don't have anyone in our top five tiers as a rookie. But Tet, man, he's a dude who I've been following at Arizona since a freshman. And he's a 3-year producer at the college level. 6'4", has that Drake London, Mike Evans build.
Yeah.
He's athletic. He runs around a 4.5 40. I mean, a lot to like. He's a crazy contested catch guy, and I think maybe the most important thing for his year one fantasy production is the fact that Bryce Young, he loves throwing to this guy, and he vouched for the Panthers taking this guy top 10. So I would be hard pressed to find another guy that Bryce is going to pepper with more targets.
Yeah, I mean, didn't they do some training and stuff even before the draft? I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
listen, the fact that Bryce Young, and I know this is a wide receiver ranking video, but the fact that Bryce Young got benched for Andy Dalton was probably the best thing that could happen for his career. I mean, he
Yeah.
just turned around his playing ability once he kind of figured things out year two. I mean, you're bringing in Ted McMillan, a guy who was, to us, the number 2 wide receiver coming into this draft, but he's a guy that was drafted to be the wide receiver 1.
Yep.
He's the dude. Everybody around him, like, there's some talent around him. Like, I'm not going to discredit some of the guys, Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette, Old Man Thielen. Like, there's some guys around him, but they drafted Ted to be the wide receiver 1. Bryce Young, some of his best QB ratings or passing ratings were on
Yeah.
those deeper balls that Ted just loves to kind of high point those contested pass catches. Carolina's also a sneaky team that just got significantly better. Bryce Young's getting a lot better. I think Tet at wide receiver 30 is a steal because, one, I like the fact that he's a rookie. Like, sometimes you just
Yeah.
need to take a risk and not like know exactly what you're going to get out of him, and that's when you get those high impact players like Malik Neighbors last season, who a lot of people were sleeping on going into redraft season. And who did we draft a lot in our leagues? And we won a handful of them because of Malik Neighbors, right? Ted McMillan has the situation here on a team that is getting better and better, on a quarterback that is young and getting better and better, and he's coming in the perfect situation where you have a good mentor in Adam Thielen,
Yeah.
in a team that is kind of sneaky, and you're the contested guy, 6'4", 230 pounds, who's going to come out there and, in my opinion, have probably the best wide receiver season of the rookie class, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'd be surprised if he didn't. And like you said, it was just so obvious that something clicked for Bryce Young, and it was definitely mental, obviously, because it's just such a mental position and it's such a hard adjustment going from the college to the pros level.
Yeah.
And I think you just saw like towards the stretch last year, towards the end of the season, something clicked. He looked like a completely different quarterback, right? I mean, it was night and day. He's throwing 5 touchdowns, running for touchdowns. Like he had some big games towards the end of the year last year, and that was without a clear number 1 wide receiver. And I think they do have some good complementary weapons, like you said, to keep some attention off of Tet. But just to make the final points, I mean, I could see him finishing as a top 24 guy.
Totally.
He has that touchdown upside. He has that red zone usage. He's gonna get the opportunity to outperform this wide receiver 30 ranking, and I think we're even a little bit ahead of consensus. I think at wide receiver 30, so a lot to like about him.
And to wrap it up, you mentioned at the beginning half PPR, that touchdown upside is significant. And you're talking about a guy that is going to be a high value deep ball threat. He's going to be that contested pass catcher. He's going to have those explosive plays. He's going to score a lot of touchdowns. I mean, I think double-digit touchdowns is for sure in the cards for him as a rookie. So I think he fits well in the top 30. And if you get him even at 30, I know it's a little bit of a reach on, based on ADP, but I think he he definitely has that upside to be, like you said, a top 24 wide receiver. But
Maybe
I,
that'll be my flag plant, E. Maybe that'll be my flag plant.
yeah,
Maybe I'll say Ted McMillan finishes ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. next year.
all
You like
right,
that one?
I
A
like
little
that.
spicy enough, or what? We
We'll be
can
comparing some flag plants there.
absolutely. We got to keep track of these, but
100%. All right,
yeah, this
well,
is fun.
this was a fun video. Our top 30. I know that we have some picks that were definitely away from consensus, so definitely curious to hear people's thoughts down below in the comment section. Give it to us. We love this kind of back and forth, and if you disagree, please let us know. But be on the lookout for our top 30 running back videos coming soon, our top 30 tight end, quarterbacks. We'll be giving you a lot of redraft content coming up in the future. So thanks for sticking around if you got here this far, or if you stuck around for this far, and we'll see you next time.
And subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Give us those likes. Give us those comments. Tell us who's too high, who's too low. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Peace
Thanks,
out.
man.